Before I start, I just wanted to share that I really love this. I really enjoy doing this. And it might be weird, it might be odd, but you guys are so nice to be up in front of. I was thinking about that, and it's just such a comfortable, wonderful place to be able to get up and kind of be yourself and share. So I just want to thank you for being who you are and being such a welcoming, comfortable group to be around. So thank you. I'm going to start. I'd like to encourage you all to adopt an attitude that things are often not as they appear. Now you might already know that, but I'm going to give you a couple of stories from my experience that will help to reinforce that. And these are stories, as mentioned, I'm an emergency physician, and I see a lot of things, and I have to adopt that attitude, because if you, in the emergency room, if you don't question things, if you don't try to dig deeper, you take things at face value, it can be very dangerous. So frequently things are very different than they appear, and here's a couple of stories that will help to elucidate that a little bit for you. Several years ago, I was working as an emergency physician in Guam, and I had just finished my training a year before, and I became the first board-certified emergency physician on the island. I went and I became the director of the department. I started to create a program. I was a big shot. It was really interesting and cool work. So one day I'm there working. The paramedics brought in a man who'd been in a car accident. And they said that out in the field he had complained of neck pain. And so they brought him in a cervical collar on a backboard, and they carried him in on a stretcher, and they laid him down in front of me, and they said that the accident didn't appear that bad. There wasn't a lot of damage, but he had neck pain, so we wanted to be careful. And I went up to him, and I tried to communicate with him, and I realized he didn't speak a word of English. He was from an outer island in Micronesia, the island of Chuuk, and he could not understand a single word I said. He couldn't understand a single word anybody said. So we were trying to evaluate this man without being able to speak the language, and he couldn't understand. So he looked okay. I looked him over head to toe. Both the vital signs were fine. I did my exam. I palpated his belly, and I did his eyes. I shined my light in his eyes, and I didn't see anything wrong with him. I couldn't find anything physically wrong. And then I was able to get him to follow some of my commands. I could get him to squeeze my finger, and I could get him to push with his feet. But when I did my exam to find out to make sure he could feel, I wasn't getting anything back. When you're testing somebody's sensation, you touch them with something sharp, and you touch them with something dull, and you see if they can feel this and that. Well, I wasn't getting any response from him. His face wasn't changing at all. I took a little wooden stick, a little Q-tip, and I started poking him. And I looked at him to see if there was a response. Nothing. It felt like he wasn't feeling anything. So then I started doing some things that were a little bit more potentially painful, just to find out if he could feel. So I'm squeezing his fingernail. And these are things I started doing some of the things that we do when we're trying to test if somebody's faking being unconscious. We have ways. We have ways of finding out. So I'm squeezing his fingernail, and I took a little pen, and I'm looking at his face to see if there's any response at all. Nothing. So then I started doing the little sternal rub thing. Nothing. Finally, I'm not proud to admit this, I started pinching his neck. Nothing. So I'm really worried. I'm thinking he has a spinal cord injury. It didn't look like he had a lot of damage, but there's something had to be wrong. We have to fly this guy out. There's no neurosurgeon here. It's going to be a huge ordeal. What are we going to do? Finally, his wife rushes in. She's all worried because she had heard he was in an accident. She spoke English. I told her, I'm kind of concerned. I don't know what's wrong with him. He doesn't seem to be feeling anything. She went up to him, crazy, and she comes back to me after 30 seconds and said, oh no, doctor, he felt everything you were doing. He just figured since you're the doctor, you know what you're doing, and that's part of the exam. So that was one story. The other one was more recent. A couple years ago, I'm working in the ER, and I'm in the hallway, and I hear this loud, frantic knocking on the door between the waiting room and the ER. And I was the only person there, so I went over and I opened the door, and I looked, and there was this frantic, hairy woman, middle-aged woman, and right next to her is a wheelchair. And in the wheelchair is this woman slumped over, older woman, gray hair, kind of slumped over. And the woman spoke broken English. She was Hispanic, and she started speaking broken English. My mother. I'm pushing her. She stopped. What do we do? And she was beside herself. So I took the wheelchair and I wheeled her in, and I got some help. And a few of us just took this woman and we scooped her up and we laid her on the gurney, and we asked the daughter to wait outside the room. We closed the door and we looked at her, and she was dead. I mean, it was clear. She was dead. She wasn't breathing. She had no heartbeat. She looked old. I didn't know how old she was. I didn't know anything about it, what was happening. So I asked somebody to start doing CPR. So there's a tech going over doing CPR, and kind of braced myself, and I went out to the room, and I approached the daughter, and I said, "Ma'am, I need to tell you that your mother's not breathing, her heart's not beating, and I need to know what to do. Do you think she would want us to do her heroic measures and try to revive her?" And she just looked at me. I don't know why. And she reached her arm and she hugged me. She said, "Oh, thank God." As it turns out, her mother had been sick for a while. She was getting weaker and sicker, and they hospitalized her. And she'd been in the hospital for a couple of weeks, and she finally got strong enough to be able to be discharged, but she couldn't go home. They didn't have enough help at home. She had to go to a nursing home. They couldn't find a nursing home closer than 2 hours away. Her mother did not want to be in a nursing home. Her mother wanted to die. They had gone through so much trauma and so much angst making the decision to send her to a nursing home. All she really wanted to do was die, and this woman, this daughter, was so beside herself. She had been pushing her mother out of the hospital after being discharged to take her 2 hours away to a place where she absolutely did not want to be. Her mother wanted to die. It was God's grace that happened the way that it did. So that was another one of those situations where things just were not as they might have appeared. So in my profession, it's very important to recognize that things are often not as they appear. And in my world, as an ER doctor, if you try to assume that you know, well, sometimes it's humorous, sometimes it's dangerous, and sometimes it's fatal. So I just want to encourage everybody to approach life with a sense of awareness that things are often not as they appear. Be flexible, be impressionable, be open. Thank you.